They had a saying that all successful people work hard. But for RMC, Ayumu, those who believed in such fairy tales were fools. People often claimed that everyone had the same conditions and equal opportunities, but there was a huge difference in birth, appearance, financial power, and talent. Ayumu understood that these were factors beyond one's control. He remembered the saying that failure was the fault of those who didn't make an effort. However, in his view, if hard work always guaranteed results, everyone would do it. He also recalled a theory that whether someone could even make an effort in the first place was determined by genetics. But Ayumu chose not to rely on such a theory. He resolved not to slack off and to never stop giving his best, thinking that at the very least he wouldn't lose to those born into better circumstances who didn't have to try. He planned to study hard, get into a good high school, and turn his life around. Ayumu's family couldn't afford to send him to cram school or buy expensive study materials. Still, he believed that studying with just one textbook was enough, and he was confident he could change his life. Later, after class, his textbook was thrown into the river. He stared at it hopelessly for a moment before retrieving the wet book and placing it back in his bag. A little while later, he arrived at their apartment building and noticed he had forgotten to bring in the laundry. He announced his return to his father, who warmly welcomed him back, but then noticed he was soaking wet. Ayumu explained that he had played in the river with others on the way home, joking that being popular wasn't easy. His father called him mischievous, and he replied that he must have taken after him. His father then told him he had left dinner for him and that they had gotten some new products in, asking for his opinion on them. Ayumu walked toward their apartment and entered their unit, wondering what his father meant by dinner, since it was always food about to be discarded. He noticed the packed meal on the table and questioned whether it was just a convenience store bento. Still, it made him realize how important it was to succeed, for his father's sake as well. The next day, in his classroom, Ayumu was taking his textbook out of his bag when a bully approached and held his nose, shouting that Ayumu stank. The bully, Yasue Koji, mockingly asked if he was really using a textbook that smelled like sewage. Though they were the ones who had thrown the book into the river, Ayumu just laughed in response. Yasue leaned in, still covering his nose, and teased him, saying his father's store was filthy too and that he had even splashed mud on the store's sign. Ayumu was startled, remembering how his father had been cleaning the sign the day before. He realized they not only bullied him, but also targeted his father's store. Filled with anger, he pushed his desk and stood up. Yasue casually asked what he was doing, if he was trying to rebel. Ayumu raised his fist, ready to strike, but of course he got his ass whooped. Yasue bent down and told him he was being cheeky, asking if he really thought he could rebel. He reminded Ayumu that this was the first time he had dared to raise a hand against them, and grabbing Ayumu's collar, mocked that with a punch like that, he could never land a hit. Yasue then punched him in the face, knocking him down again. Yasue asked if he truly believed he could defy him and reminded him that his father's convenience store was a franchise of their company. Yasue added that even among the chain's outlets, Ayumu's father's store had the lowest profit margin, and that he had heard it was the most underperforming location. He mockingly called both Ayumu and his father utterly useless. Ayumu knew Yasue's father was the president of a nationwide convenience store chain, the parent company that operated AK Mart, and also the president of Eiko Holdings. In other words, a man his father could never stand up to. Ayumu realized he could never win against Koji, the heir to Eiko Holdings. After a few more minutes of beating him, Koji and his minions walked away, leaving Ayumu kneeling on the ground, both knees and elbows down, crying in pain and helpless anger. He knew that he could barely endure the insults, the pranks, the teasing, and having his belongings thrown away. But what was happening to him now was the worst of it all. It wasn't that Ayumu hated it because it physically hurt. The bullying had already become a part of his daily reality. However, more than anything, what felt most miserable and humiliating to him was the thought that if only he hadn't resisted, he wouldn't have had to appear so pitiful. Suddenly, someone appeared beside him and asked if he was okay. He looked up and saw that it was Mizunashi Akiba. She told him that his face was swollen and said she would put on a band-aid. Before he could respond, she had already taken out a bandage and told him that he could rely on her if he needed anything, and that she could lend him her textbooks as well. She then assured him that she would make sure to tell them to stop. Ayumu looked away and clenched his teeth before begging her not to do that. When she resisted, he reassured her that it was fine and that he was okay. She stood up and told him that she understood. He thought of himself as the worst, knowing that Mizunashi was beautiful, smart, and capable of anything. Everyone in class admired her. He couldn't believe someone like her would be kind to someone like him. He couldn't make sense of the uneasy feeling he felt. As she turned to leave, she reminded him that she hated those guys and told him to do his best, not to lose to sneaky and cowardly people. Because she liked people like him more. She walked away, and Ayumu remembered her eyes. They were the eyes of someone truly looking at something. He guessed she wasn't lying. He could tell that Mizunashi truly hated them, and that meant, in her eyes, he wasn't someone on her level. He stood up, thinking that Mizunashi was really cute, and he wanted her to see him as an equal. That thought made him decide that he should try his best. Later, after class, he was in the locker room when he heard someone say, "Stop doing it." He was surprised when he recognized the voice. It was Mizunashi. Yasue responded, annoyed, calling her annoying. Ayumu quickly grabbed his bag and hid himself, realizing that Mizunashi was confronting Yasue. He then heard her tell Yasue that bullying the weak was wrong. He was surprised to hear that she thought of him as weak, yet he knew that if Yasue laid a hand on her, he would have to protect her. However, he heard Yasue mockingly ask if that was so, then say she was a terrible woman. Yasue added that if someone as pretty as her acted kindly to someone like Ayumu, the weakling would surely fall in love with her. She replied that there was no way that would happen and insisted that Ayumu wouldn't fall for such an act. Yasue then asked if she didn't even realize it and warned her not to give Ayumu false hope, because she was his fiancée. Ayumu, hidden behind them, was stunned. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, especially remembering how Mizunashi had said she hated Yasue. Yasue then told Mizunashi that someone like him, the son of a major corporation, and someone like her, who came from a prominent family, were living in a completely different world than someone like Ayumu. He added that only someone like him could match her in status. Before Ayumu could hear more, he bolted from the locker room and continued running, far beyond the school grounds. He cried, thinking that effort was pointless, that everything was determined by talent and what one was born with. He believed he could never beat someone with looks, wealth, and talent. No matter how hard he tried, there was no such thing as being rewarded for effort. He kept running, not paying attention to where he was going, cursing in pain. Then he suddenly tripped and fell to the ground, but he didn't get up right away. Instead, he screamed that effort was worthless. Suddenly, a mask on the wall spoke and asked if it should guarantee the result. He looked up in shock and saw the mask move out from the wall. He was frozen in fear as he watched it transform into a monster, which then said that if he wished, it would give him the results of his efforts. He quickly crawled his ass back and shouted, asking what on earth it was. The creature replied that its name was Dashoku, the one who devours human laziness. Dashoku then told him that, simply put, in human language, he was like a devil. Ayumu shouted back, not to lie, calling him a pervert. Calmly, Dashoku told him to look around. Ayumu was startled to see a couple staring at him, frightened, as he appeared to be muttering to himself. Dashoku explained that he was the only one who could see him. Realizing this, Ayumu considered that if no one else could see Dashoku, then maybe he really was a devil. Without waiting for further proof, he sprinted away, shouting that whatever Dashoku was, he was dangerous. Bro did a really smart move. He kept running, wondering why weird things always happened to him and thinking that he was truly getting the worst of it. Moments later, he reached his apartment and slammed the door shut, but just as he started to catch his breath, he screamed in fear. Someone had touched his shoulder. He spun around and collapsed to the floor when he saw Dashoku inside the apartment. In shock, he asked how Dashoku had followed him. Leaning in, Dashoku reminded him that he was like a devil and asked if Ayumu believed him now. Stuttering, Ayumu said he believed him and begged to be spared, but Dashoku told him not to get the wrong idea. He wasn't there to take his life. Instead, he was there to give him the results of his efforts. Confused, Ayumu asked what that meant. Dashoku showed him his phone. Ayumu asked when he had taken it, but Dashoku began swiping through it and, after installing something, tossed the phone back to him. Ayumu shouted at him not to install weird apps, but Dashoku insisted it was necessary to fulfill his wishes. Ayumu stared at him in complete confusion, then looked at the phone. A new app with a purple monster logo had appeared titled Rental Effort. He asked Dashoku what it was, and whether the icon was supposed to represent him. Dashoku cheerfully asked if it looked cute. Ayumu just stared in silence. Dashoku clicked the app himself and told him to open it. Explanations began popping up on the screen. Ayumu asked what it was, and Dashoku replied that it was a way to classify abilities and quantify them, making them easier for humans to understand. The app displayed Ayumu's status, and Dashoku began listing his abilities. Ayumu asked if the scale was out of 100, but Dashoku replied that there was no limit. If someone was truly capable, they could have more than 100 points. Ayumu sighed, saying he was totally weak. Dashoku immediately agreed and asked if Ayumu seriously thought he was on the strong side. However, Dashoku assured him that it was with weak people like him that the app truly showed its value. Dashoku then asked if Ayumu could make fried rice. He replied that he couldn't. Dashoku instructed him to tap the order button on the app and say, "I want to be able to make fried rice." Ayumu did as he was told. The app then displayed a message. Desired effort result accepted. He felt dizzy as a loading icon appeared. Suddenly, something emerged from his phone and struck him directly on the head. The app announced, "Rental will begin now." To his shock, his body began to move on its own. He opened the fridge, took out ingredients, chopped vegetables, and began cooking fried rice. When the cooking was finished, he regained control. He took a spoonful and was amazed. It was delicious, 100 times better than a discarded bento. Dashoku asked if he understood now, explaining that this was the power of rental effort, but he added that it was only a rental. In other words, Ayumu would have to repay it later. Doshoku told him to check the repayment condition. He did, and the app displayed, "Repayment, read recipes on a recipe website for 10 minutes today." A link was included. Ayumu nodded, saying he understood. Doshoku explained further. He would gain the ability first and then later complete the necessary effort to make it fully his. That was the concept of the rental effort app. Ayumu asked what would happen if he ignored the repayment condition after gaining the ability. Doshoku calmly replied, "You'll die." Ayumu leapt up in horror and shouted, asking if that applied even to the tutorial he just completed. Doshoku casually confirmed it and added that if he hadn't read the recipes, he'd already be dead. Furious, Ayumu shouted at him for installing such a dangerous app without permission. But Doshoku merely laughed, saying it was hard to take him seriously while he was eating fried rice so happily. Then, recalling Yasue's cruelty, Ayumu became serious. He told Doshoku that so far, he had only used the app for something trivial like making fried rice. But he wondered, could he use it to become strong like a professional martial artist? Doshoku grinned and said yes, but warned that the amount of effort required would be extreme. A 100-kilometer run, lifting 100 kilograms 50 times for 10 sets, and more. Ayumu shouted that he'd die from all that. Doshoku replied that going from zero to top tier demanded that much effort, but if it was just to land a punch on a bully in his class, it would be much easier. Suddenly, mud splattered against his apartment window. He looked down and saw the bullies with Yasue. They threw more mud, laughing. His father came out to stop them, but they threw mud at his face too. Ayumu watched in anger as they mocked his father for staying silent even after being humiliated, sneering that like father, like son, they were both too afraid to fight back. Yasue then cruelly told his father that even when his wife was taken by a company executive, he just smiled and licked the man's shoes. He asked if Ayumu's father wasn't ashamed to be alive, yet his father remained silent. Watching everything from his window, Ayumu knew the rental effort app was suspicious, and if he made the wrong wish, it could cost him his life. But he decided, even if it was dangerous, he would make the bullies regret it. Even if it meant selling his soul to the devil, he tapped the app to make a wish. His father smiled and told Yasue that while he might be the heir to the parent company, he was sure his father would be disappointed if he knew what Yasue was doing. He added that he would pretend he hadn't seen anything and calmly ordered Yasue to go home. This angered Yasue even more, and he demanded to know what was with that condescending tone. He sneered that even though Ayumu's father was at the bottom, he still acted like he'd risen to the top just because he was an adult. Yasue then warned Ayumu's father that starting tomorrow, he would make Ayumu suffer. He added that there was one more thing. His father wanted to open a bigger store closer to the station, and the store with the lowest sales would be shut down. Ayumu's father stood in disbelief as Yasue tauntingly asked whether it was true that their store wouldn't be able to continue if he claimed he'd been given an unreasonable lecture by some old man. In desperation, Ayumu's father hugged Yasue's foot and shouted that he only wanted to make sure his son could attend university properly. But if the store went bankrupt, he wouldn't be able to. Yasue coldly ordered him to apologize and declared that he would teach him how to show real sincerity. Moments later, Ayumu's father was completely bald and naked, kneeling on the ground and apologizing to Yasue. Yasue's friends filmed it all, laughing and shouting that there was a pervert in the store. They eventually ran off, and Yasue smirked as he looked down at Ayumu's father, saying he never wanted to become an adult like that. From his bedroom window, Ayumu witnessed everything and tightly gripped his cell phone in fury. Later at the park, the bullies were laughing over the video of Ayumu's father. They joked about how it was their first time using clippers, but shaving someone's head turned out to be really fun. They then talked about doing the same to Ayumu at school. But Yasue told them to stop. It would be boring to do the same thing again. He urged them to come up with something more shocking. One of Yasue's friends agreed and showed the video to some girls, but suddenly, mud splattered across his face. Everyone panicked as they turned to see someone playing with the mud. It was Ayumu. He walked up to them and stopped. Yasue asked if he was planning to throw it. He reminded Ayumu that he could barely throw a weak ball during dodgeball in gym class, warning him not to get cocky just because he got lucky once. But Ayumu proved him wrong and threw the mud, and it landed squarely on Yasue's face. The bullies stood stunned. Ayumu, however, felt proud. The old him would never have been able to do it, but thanks to his rented ability, the skill of a middle school baseball bench player, he could. Yasue, furious, demanded to know if Ayumu was stupid or wanted to die. He approached him, asking how dare someone like him do that, and shouted at him to look at what he'd done to his face. He swung his fist, telling Ayumu he should live in fear. But Ayumu managed to dodge it, surprising Yasue. Ayumu had dodged it thanks to his rented ability, the skill to defeat one middle school delinquent. He realized it was the limit of what he could handle right now. If the ability were too advanced for him, he wouldn't be able to repay it. He dashed forward, thankful that it still worked. Yasue quickly covered his face and screamed, asking what was wrong with him. Ayumu tried to punch him, but Yasue dodged and kneed him in the stomach. Ayumu gasped and collapsed, saliva flying from his mouth. Yasue observed that his punching technique was sloppy and his defense poor, wondering if the earlier dodge had just been a fluke. Ayumu forced himself back up, realizing he had made a mistake. Though he was aware his physical abilities had increased, he wasn't used to fighting. He couldn't handle the flow of combat and wondered what to do. Suddenly, Dashoku's voice interrupted his thoughts, saying it was better not to think too deeply. Ayumu turned and saw Dashoku lounging on a bar nearby. Dashoku explained that once an ability was rented, the body would remember it from that moment. It was better to act on instinct than to overthink it. Ayumu asked what he meant by instinct, and Dashoku explained that if he had rented a martial artist's skill, he'd gain the ability to fight properly. But in this case, he only rented the ability to defeat a delinquent. Delinquents didn't use their heads, and Ayumu's current way of fighting wasn't one he had installed yet, so he needed to fight instinctively. Still panting, Ayumu didn't really understand what instinct meant, but he decided to charge forward and threw another punch at Yasue. Yasue blocked again and countered with a punch to Ayumu's face. Staggering, Ayumu bent down as Yasue launched another strike. Frustrated, Ayumu swung his fist upward, wishing he could land just one hit. He poured all his frustration into that punch, and it landed. Yasue stumbles back. Ayumu was glad, but Yasue's friends were stunned. One of them asked if it was for real and whether Ayumu had always been that strong. Yasue, still dizzy from the punch, cursed and shouted for help, vowing to beat the crap out of Ayumu. The others surrounded him. Despite the odds, Ayumu told himself it was okay. With how he was now, he believed he could win. But then one of the bullies grabbed him tightly from behind. Ayumu turned his eyes toward Dashoku, silently asking for help. Dashoku simply replied, "Impossible. You said one delinquent. You haven't gained the ability to fight multiple people." This left Ayumu sweating bullets. A moment later, he was beaten severely and tied upside down while Dashoku laughed and teasingly said he looked horrible. Dashoku then leaned closer and asked if he was still alive. Ayumu weakly replied that he was barely alive and had almost died because of some damn devil. But Dashoku told him not to blame him. It was his own fault for not setting things up so he could win against multiple opponents. Ayumu responded that he understood, and, smiling proudly, told Dashoku that he didn't regret it. Dashoku was surprised by his smirk and asked if he had gone crazy. Swinging his body upward, Ayumu grabbed the steel beam above him and explained that today was the first time he had fought back, and it made him happy. Dashoku asked what he was talking about and reminded him that he had lost. But Ayumu clarified. Yes, he had been beaten, but they had only managed to hurt his face. He explained that after realizing he couldn't win, he focused on protecting his arms and legs, because if those were broken, he wouldn't be able to continue his daily runs or push-ups. He managed to free himself and stood up, telling Dashoku that while his face hurt, his arms and legs were still fine. He confidently declared that once he repaid the effort, he would become even stronger with the next rental. Dashoku smiled at his words, realizing that while he had initially thought Ayumu was a pushover, he actually had a sharp mind, making Dashoku even more interested in him. Meanwhile, Ayumu was busy thinking about the satisfying feeling of landing a punch on Yasue's face. It had been his first time hitting someone, and it felt good. Still, he was disappointed he hadn't completely beaten Yasue. He swore that next time, no matter how many opponents there were, it wouldn't matter. He shouted that he would become stronger. However, the next morning he was screaming in pain inside his room while furiously doing push-ups, aiming to complete 100 of them. He shouted to Dashoku that it was too much and asked if doing 100 push-ups was really that hard. Sitting casually behind him, Dashoku replied that it was, especially with Ayumu's skinny arms. Ayumu shouted for him not to sit on his back, but Dashoku reminded him he had no physical form and shouldn't be heavy. Still, Ayumu complained that Dashoku looked heavy and finally finished his 100 push-ups. Next, he moved on to his next repayment, a 10-kilometer run. He was panting heavily as he ran through the streets. Dashoku commented that Ayumu seemed like the type to wake up early and sleep early. Ayumu explained that if something happened at school and he couldn't run later, it would be over for him, hence why he ran early in the morning. While running, he was startled to find Mizunashi suddenly appearing beside him. At first, she didn't recognize him, but as soon as she realized it was him, she immediately asked him if she could run with him. Shyly, he agreed. She asked if he was out jogging, and he simply replied yes. She then asked if anything had happened since then, but he answered that he didn't really want to talk about it. She respected that and told him she understood. As they ran together, Ayumu reflected that if she was merely worrying about him, it meant she still didn't see him as an equal. He wondered if it was because of his bad personality. He hated living while lying to himself about his feelings. After a while, he asked if he could ask her something, and she replied, "What is it?" He asked if the fiancé thing was true, explaining that he had overheard a conversation about it. She sadly answered that Yasue had been spreading it around. It was something their parents had arranged without their consent. Her father, she explained, held political influence, and Yasue's father was probably hoping for more connections, but she made it clear she wanted no part of it. Daishoku smiled upon seeing Ayumu's relieved reaction. Mizunashi added that both she and Yasue had exams to focus on, and neither wanted to be dragged down by outdated traditions. She asked which high school Ayumu was aiming for. He answered that he was thinking of Sanzu High. She stared at him quietly, knowing that Sanzu High was a national school, prestigious and strict, built to produce students with exceptional talent. Top achievers from across the country gathered there. Noticing her silence, Ayumu guessed that maybe Sanzu High was too much for him. Still, he confidently declared that he wanted to get into the best high school he could to make life easier for his father. Mizunashi smiled and told him it was a good ambition. She revealed that she was also aiming for Sanzu High. She then asked if he knew where Yasue was planning to go. Ayumu replied that he didn't know. She informed him that Yasue was also aiming for Sanzu High. She suggested that there were other options if he wanted to get a good job, but he firmly refused. He told her he didn't need sympathy and that it would be ridiculous to change his path because of Yasue. He swore firmly that he would do things his own way. He would enter Sanzu High through his own efforts, beat Yasue, and make Mizunashi see him as an equal, not as someone to be pitied. Without realizing it, Mizunashi smiled brightly while staring at him. Half a year later, Ayumu stood at the entrance ceremony of Sanzu High, confidently looking up at his dream school. He thought to himself that from now on, his high school life would begin. He then headed straight to the reception desk, where the in-charge students asked him for his student ID. He took out his cell phone and scanned his ID using it. At Sanzu High School, students were given a student handbook app that also served as an ID card, allowing access to various school services by scanning it. The student verified his information and confirmed his registration. Ayumu thanked them and started walking away, but before he could get far, he noticed the in-charge students teasingly staring at him. Curious, he looked down at his student number and realized it indicated he was assigned to F class. Based on their reactions, he figured F class must be the group for underperforming students. He remembered that he had barely managed to pass the entrance exam with the help of the rental effort app. It wasn't surprising that he ended up at the bottom once enrolled. Still, he knew that the results of his efforts were guaranteed. He just needed to keep working hard and level up. He was then surprised when he noticed his ability chart. Clicking it open, he saw that with the app, he could view his abilities in numerical form. He guessed that these values were set by the school, based on entrance exam results and likely influenced by personal judgment and bias. He noticed something strange. The numbers on his school chart matched those from Daishoku's app exactly. Wondering what it meant, he tapped the chart again, but it didn't respond. He figured that the school's system functioned a little differently. Remembering that with the rental effort app he could view detailed stats, he decided to check his physique ability. He realized that his physique and martial arts skills, used when he fought Yasue, and his academic knowledge, used during the entrance exam, were all influenced by the app's rentals. It made him wonder, were the breakdown in criteria between the school and Daishoku's app truly a coincidence? Or did Sanzu High have some connection to Daishoku? Later, he waited with the other new students in the ceremony venue. The host informed them that the entrance ceremony was about to begin and introduced the chairman. The chairman stepped onto the stage and congratulated them for enrolling at the prestigious Sanzu High. However, he coldly added that was all there was to it. They were merely the top among high school students in Japan. From the perspective of Japanese society or the world at large, they were nothing but garbage. The students were stunned by his harsh words. The chairman asked if they thought he was harassing them and stated bluntly that if they felt they had enrolled in a terrible school, they were free to leave. He continued, criticizing how the country had promoted individualism without the ability to back it up, resulting in an increase in people who soaked in the lukewarm water of corruption. The chairman urged them to look across the sea. There, people fought with all they had, sacrificing everything to reach greater heights. Only those who put in real effort and aimed for more would drive the world forward. He warned them that they would never reach that level if they stayed comfortable and complacent. The chairman shouted that if they intended to live comfortably under the country's protection, they should leave. Sanzu High was for those who aspired higher. He explained that students were divided into classes based on ability, from F class to S class. He warned those in higher classes not to become arrogant, reminding them that higher classes existed only because lower ones supported them. He added that the spirit of noblesse oblige, those of higher status offering kindness to those below, was a principle they must uphold. Ayumu was irritated, remembering Mizunashi's unintentional kindness, and realized they were not equals yet. The chairman emphasized that no one should neglect strengthening their own abilities. Being in S-class today did not guarantee anything. Complacency would drag them down. Conversely, even those starting in F-class could surpass others if they worked hard enough. The chairman ended his speech by wishing them all the best, inspiring Ayumu to swear that he would absolutely climb to the top. Later, the students headed to their respective classrooms. When Ayumu entered F class, Yasue saw him and was immediately annoyed. Yasue tripped him, and Ayumu stumbled, about to smash his head against the desk, but managed to plant his hand firmly on the desk and do a gymnastic landing. Everyone stared at him in awe. Yasue was stunned. His plan to humiliate Ayumu on the first day had failed. Awkwardly, Ayumu apologized to his classmates for the trouble, further irritating Yasue, who noticed the other students seemed impressed by Ayumu. Ayumu sat down in his chair, confidently thinking that being bullied was fine until middle school, but now things were different. The following week, he truly felt how different high school was from middle school. For example, during PE, when the teacher fired the starting pistol, the students began running. Yasue took an early lead but was shocked when Ayumu sprinted past him, amazing the other students and confusing Yasue. In math class, Ayumu answered a difficult problem on the board with ease. The teacher praised him as the best student in F class. Proudly, Ayumu returned to his seat while Yasue stared at him, both furious and baffled. After a week, during lunch break, Ayumu sat on a bench to rest, feeling genuinely happy. He thought high school life was incredibly fun, unaware that a girl was hiding behind a tree, suspiciously watching and listening to him. Later after school, he was walking home with a big smile on his face, happy that he had done well at school again today. His high school debut felt like a success. He teared up from happiness, glad that he had made the effort. However, he was startled when his father appeared in front of him and asked if something good had happened. Ayumu quickly replied that it was nothing, surprised to find himself already standing in front of their house. His father looked at him in confusion, making Ayumu remember how, back in middle school, even when unpleasant things happened, he would pretend to be popular just to keep up appearances. But now that happiness was real, he didn't even feel the need to fake it. He headed straight up to his room, and his father called after him, telling him that once he was done upstairs, he should come down and help with stocking. Ayumu replied that he would. Since entering high school, Ayumu had decided to help out at their store as a part-time job. Although it was just assisting, he was paid for it. After changing into his store uniform, he thought about how a fulfilling high school life required some pocket money too. And besides, helping at the store was fun. Everything seemed to be going well. But suddenly, while working, a customer beside him dropped a pack of food and asked Ayumu to pick it up. He stared at the food for a moment, wondering why the man didn't just pick it up himself. As he bent down to grab it, the man gave him an autograph in the face and threw him out of the store, causing him to land face first on the road. Trembling, he looked up and saw Yasue and the other bullies standing there with their motorcycles. Furious, Ayumu realized it had been Yasue's plan all along. Yasue smirked and said it looked like Ayumu was having a great time at high school, and mockingly asked if he had forgotten his place. Yasue then warned him that he would be hung up naked like before, so he should prepare himself. One of the men volunteered to handle Ayumu first, bragging that he hadn't made it into high school and now had nothing but time. Swinging his fist at Ayumu, the man shouted that he wanted some fun with a punching bag for the first time in a while. Seeing the punch coming, Ayumu recognized it as a typical, wide-swinging street punch. Even though most of his efforts lately had gone into studying for the entrance exams, Ayumu had anticipated bullying at Sanzu High and had gained some martial arts knowledge. Before the man's fist could reach him, Ayumu struck with a quick straight punch, landing it cleanly on the man's face and sending him collapsing to the ground. The other bullies froze in shock. Ayumu remained calm, knowing that wide, swinging punches took too much time and wasted motion, making them easy to counter with a straight punch. Yasue was startled, wondering when Ayumu had learned martial arts. Trying to regain control, Yasue smirked and taunted him, suggesting he hadn't learned anything worthwhile. Suddenly, another man grabbed Ayumu from behind, locking his arms. Yasue shouted that, just like last time, Ayumu couldn't win against multiple opponents. Calmly, Ayumu stomped hard on the foot of the man holding him. As the man cried out in pain, Ayumu twisted the man's arm around forcefully, putting it behind his back and cracking it in the process. Another attacker rushed toward him, but before he could get close, Ayumu kicked him hard in the chin. Hearing more movement, Ayumu dragged the injured man sideways, using him as a shield to slam into the next attacker. In seconds, 4 men lay unconscious on the ground. Ayumu turned and calmly stared at Yasue, who couldn't believe what he was seeing, that Ayumu could handle multiple opponents and that he had grown this strong in just 1 year. Feeling a surge of confidence, Ayumu shouted to himself that he could do it, he could win. Yasue throws a straight punch, and Ayumu thought that if it was a beginner's punch, he could counter it with a straight punch. But before he could strike, Yasue's fist slammed into his face. Ayumu staggered back, shocked at how fast Yasue's fists had become. Yasue sneered and called him an idiot, asking if he thought he hadn't changed at all. Bouncing lightly on his toes, Yasue demonstrated a boxing stance. He proudly said that he had been practicing boxing for a while now, and had gotten much stronger recently, and he was enjoying it. He then mocked Ayumu, saying he thought he wanted a one-on-one fight. Ayumu stayed quiet, knowing from his martial arts basics that he should observe his opponent carefully and respond. But Yasue was simply too fast for him to track. Yasue's next punch appeared almost instantly. Fortunately, Ayumu managed to block it by raising his arm just in time. He tried to calm himself, telling himself that Yasue was strong. But he had the rental effort app on his side. However, he quickly realized he didn't have time to pull out his phone in the middle of a fight. As Yasue's fist launched toward him again, panic set in. Unable to block it properly, he took the punch full force in the stomach and collapsed to his knees in pain. Yasue turned his back to him, calling him pathetic for not even being able to lift his head. Laughing loudly, Yasue walked away, taunting Ayumu that he should now know his place. Still kneeling, Ayumu quietly pulled out his phone and began searching.